Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Senate Education on Friday, March 12th. It's 2:42 in the afternoon. Mr. Desmarais.
Yes. Okay, so you have the revised draft, and
I know I have it somewhere.
I can bring it up if you want me to.
I have mine here. Does anyone not have a revised draft? It's online, I believe, and I have it in an email. Okay, I think everybody has it.
Okay.
What was that, Senator Perchlik?
Is it 4.1?
4.1. Yep.
Wait, is it on email, you said?
It's on the.
It's on our webpage.
It's on the webpage, sorry.
I misheard that one. Okay.
Does everybody have it? Yeah. Okay. Okay. For the record, Jim Desmarais of Let's Console. We are walking through draft 4.1 of your amendment to S13. The new language is highlighted. It's on page. No page numbers again. Sorry. On my draft, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, page 5. And it's on line 14, and it says public meetings. The task force shall hold one or more meetings to share information and receive input from the public concerning its work, which may be part of or separate from its regular meetings.
Looking for questions or comments on this. Senator Lyons.
Looks good. Just need to add S after it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, it's great. I think it really, and the shall is important, so there has to be at least one. But
Yeah.
then the group can decide how best to approach it.
Other questions? Seeing none, I would certainly welcome a motion to move draft 4.1 of the strike all amendment to S13 out of committee and onto appropriations.
So moved.
It will be 5.1 by the time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yep.
5.1, draft 5.1. Moved by Senator Perchlik. Any committee discussion? Seeing none, Senator Perchlik, would you mind calling the roll?
I do not mind.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator Terenzini.
Yes.
Senator Chitman.
Aye.
Senator Hooker. Senator Hooker.
Yes.
Okay. And the chair, Senator Campion.
Yes.
Oh, wait, I should go first. I vote yes, and then Campion.
Yes. Thanks.
600.
Anybody interested in reporting the Perchlik implementation plan?
Raise your hand, Perchlik.
I'll do it if nobody else is looking forward to doing it.
It's up to you, Senator Perchlik.
Sure, I'll do it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Senator Perchlik. Appreciate that very much. Happy to help in any way, even if you change your mind. Okay. Thank you. Seeing that our witnesses are here, if and thinking about timing, I would like to come back to S16 at the end of our day and move on and continue our work on S100. The S16 amendment, I don't know if, I think we'll have time at the end of the day to address that. And seeing that witnesses have arrived and we're a little bit behind schedule, let's move to S100. S100, an act relating to universal school breakfast and lunch. We are, as I mentioned at the start of committee, we are going to continue testimony today, and we are going to move this today, knowing that it will be at least an appropriations next week. And I have it on our agenda for Tuesday for additional committee discussion, following up on what we hear today, any possible amendments. So there is still time, knowing that there might still be work to do, but knowing that today is crossover, it does need to leave committee today. So with that, Mr. Desmarais, I see you're at the top of the list, but I don't think we need to hear anything from you at this point. I think we will start with Jesse Roy and then go to Mr. Francis, Ms. Zaglowski, and Mr. Fana. So, Senator Hooker, please.
I'll be leaving for appropriations during this testimony, so.
Okay, and thanks for doing that. Great, Mr. Roy.
Good afternoon, senators and others. Thanks for having me and for the opportunity to testify about this bill. For the record, my name is Jesse Roy. I'm the Assistant Division Director for the Federal Education and Support Programs Division at the Vermont Agency of Education. And my understanding, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to overstep, is that I'm here just to provide a walkthrough or any explanation needed for changes to Section 45, I believe, which concerns data collection around federal funding and other uses that the agency has.
Okay, so let's see. Let me just get my copy. So we are looking at S100, and we are looking at Section 45. Is that what you said?
Also, the way it reads to me on my screen is it says Section 4, 16 VSA 45, which is federal funds and data collection. Sure. I'm new to this. I apologize.
No, and I'm don't have the best hearing. And Section 45 would make it be a massive, massive bill.
Yeah. Sorry to raise any alarm.
No problems at all. Okay, please go ahead, Mr. Roy.
Yeah, so some language I believe was drafted in the Senate Agriculture Committee, and the agency is requesting that some small modifications are made to the language. And I'm not sure, what folks have seen or have in front of them in terms of that language, if it's been shared, what came out of the Agriculture Committee, and then what the agency is requesting that be changed slightly.
Nope, this is all you, Mr. Roy.
Okay, so why don't is it possible for me to share with the group what I have on my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, let me go ahead and make arrangements to do that. And I apologize for not quite being prepared.
Nope, not a problem at all.
All right.
Let's see. Did Jeannie make you a co-host? Jeannie, if you could just let us know if you're there.
I did.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I have shared. Are folks able to see what's on my screen now?
No, I'm afraid not.
Oh my. Let me try one more thing.
Okay.
How about now?
We see that. There we go. There you go. Perfect.
All right. Thanks for bearing with me. And I apologize for this being in the body of an email, but this is the official request as summarized for me by a colleague. So in the top half of the email, if folks are able to see, is the existing language that came out of Senate Ag Committee, I believe.
Mr. Roy, do you mind making that a little larger?
Sure, I will. Thank you.
Thanks.
Is this better?
A little. Be a little larger for us old guys.
Sure. There we go.
There we go. Thank you.
All right, so not a whole lot of, at least in my opinion, our opinion, real substantive change here. Just a couple of small additions to make sure we really capture the breadth of the levels at which we typically collect data for purposes such as providing federal funds for school districts or LEAs or schools to qualify for participation in programs. And of course, I'm talking about low-income data, the data in question here. And also some of our uses. You know, the original language, as you can see at the top here, just describes using low-income data for federal funds. There are actually a couple of other ways broadly that we use this data, and they are highlighted in the first line, beginning with the number 1 below. Not only are we using low-income data basically to determine funding allocations, we also use it to determine eligibility for various programs or supports that the agency provides, and as well as for collecting and reporting data, for example, student performance data that's disaggregated by low-income status. So just those additions to really capture the breadth of the ways that the agency uses this data. And then you'll see that's really the big change next to 1. You'll see next to 2 and then 3B, it again just reiterates rather than only school district, which is what it said above, local education agency, school district, and school. Again, just to capture the various levels at which we use data or collect data for the purposes outlined next to 1. And that's what I've got.
Sorry, if you would be so kind as to take us off screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
You'd like me to stop sharing, Chair Champion?
You don't.
Okay.
Thanks. Terrific. Thanks for that. I'm wondering, Mr. Roy, what was you said you mentioned this in Senate Ag.
Yep.
Was there resistance to this? Was there just not enough time? Can you give us a sense? And I'm happy to check with the chair of Ag this evening on this.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. No, simply the bill, and I may get some of the language wrong, moved forward before we had crafted sort of our response. They crafted the language above in response to some concerns we had. They had initially prescribed a certain collection. The agency is in the process of developing a collection to parallel the free and reduced lunch collection that we would lose by moving to a universal meals program statewide. And so, they agreed to defer to us with this language of developing a new measure or landing on a new measure that would best suit our purposes. And then we just in response had a couple of tweaks that we wanted to make, and it was really just a matter of time. I think the bill had moved, before we had a chance to respond.
Sure. Sounds like a good next step would be for me to touch base with the chair and for us to also draft this up for us to have a look at on Tuesday. Since, as I mentioned, we'll move it today, but we have plenty of time to make amendments. And this would be one such amendment, which strikes me as quite reasonable, but I'm looking to my colleagues to see if they have any questions or immediate concerns with this. Okay, seeing none, Mr. Roy, if you'd be so kind as to forward that to our Ledge Council if you haven't done so already, and I will ask Mr. Desmarais to draft that, and our committee assistant, Jeannie Lowell, will put that in the on our agenda for Tuesday.
Great, thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, continuing on with this. Let's see. Mr. Francis.
Thank you, Chair Campion. Thank you, committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, excuse me, on behalf of the Superintendent's Association, the School Boards Association, and the Principals Association. I'm glad for the opportunity to testify here. I think that the suggestions that we will make about the bill are proper in the purview for the Senate Education Committee because it concerns education policy affecting our school districts across the state. In following the Doyle rule for testimony, I'm going to read my testimony because I think that's the most succinct way to get through it, and I will move through it rapidly. It's relatively short. Vermont's public schools are in the business of providing nutritional meals to school children. It is important work, it is necessary work, and for many educators and advocacy organizations with which they collaborate, it is a passion. Vermont's public schools have displayed a commitment to providing healthy foods through partnership, creativity, and dedication before the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, and will undoubtedly after the pandemic. After the onset of the pandemic, ensuring that every child had access to healthy meals was the first big challenge Vermont school districts responded to. School districts and school personnel have performed admirably in this regard. S100 represents an effort to see Vermont school nutrition programs serve every student through the universal provision of meals, and to do so in a manner that will work better for students and families and for Vermont's farmers, for whom schools are an important market. One shared goal of our associations is to make sure that any new state requirements will both accomplish their intended purpose while also working well for schools. With respect to S100, we have one very important request for a critical improvement to the bill and two recommendations for helpful improvements. The critical improvement, please streamline the funding process and create a direct connection between this state initiative and a state funding source. As currently written, the funding process for this new state initiative would require voters in each of Vermont's 115 public school districts to individually approve proportional expenditures, which statewide will total an estimated 24 to 40 million in new annual costs. The requirement to secure local voter approval for this investment adds an unnecessary step to funding this program and needlessly complicates the budgeting process for Vermont school districts. In fact, in districts under tremendous budget pressure already, it will put feeding all children in competition with important programs currently in place to serve children in an array of also useful ways. This new state initiative should be funded at the state level through a state allocation of funds. Please change the funding mechanism within this bill by appropriating the total amount of required funds at the state level and removing the need for local districts to seek voter approval in order to expend the funds necessary to make universal school meals a reality. This approach is more efficient, more transparent, and more equitable. This change can be accomplished by a simple adjustment to Section 2 of the bill as follows. You could simply change the reference to food program in Section 1264, and I've added the language. I think that if you agree to this, Jim Demaray might want to take a different approach, but my effort here is to show you that it is simply changing the obligation to raise the funds for this program away from individual school districts and have the state pay for this new state initiative. As for recommendations for useful improvements to the bill, we support Secretary French's testimony that the bill should simply provide additional funds to all schools on a per plate basis, like we currently do with state match funding. And that's a direct quote from his testimony, rather than establish a complicated reimbursement program that will add work for both school districts and for the Agency of Education. Legislative intent could indicate that the funds are to be used in support of using local food products. Furthermore, we share Secretary French's observations and concerns about data currently generated through free and reduced meal applications, and the fact that a universal meals program will remove an inducement for families to provide useful information. Any solution to this issue must balance the merits of a universal school meals program, the need for good data, and the administrative burdens placed on the Agency of Education and local districts from a process and workload standpoint. School district business offices are already under tremendous pressure, which has increased as the result of the pandemic. Presumably, the bill can be improved in this regard as it progresses through the legislative process. Our associations will assist to the best of our abilities. Thank you. In wrapping up, I'd just like to say this. We're in regular communications with members, particularly of the School Boards Association, the Superintendent's Association, and the business managers. We held a meeting on this bill, and what we heard most concern about was the first thing that I referenced. School districts are very concerned that they'll be asked to fund this program, and parenthetically through the education fund, by voting on these allocations locally. I know that the committee understands the school budgeting process. If there's a mandatory program with a price tag and your budget is defeated, that particular program cannot be adjusted. This is an important state priority, but as a state priority, it should be funded at the state level. That's our most significant concern. It's one that we hope that you see fit to address. I think it's better addressed in the Senate Education Committee than it would be in a committee that's not policy for education. The other two matters that we reference are important, and we want to work on those. But the most important issue today is the issue of funding this important piece of legislation. My colleague Sue Zaglowski is here with me. If she may want to add something with your permission, Chair Campion, and then I know that Rick Pembroke from the Business Managers Association is here as well.
So in short, you would prefer a process where there's general fund dollars going to this in some
It wouldn't matter to me. And so the most important thing is that a school district, which is, you know, if you utilize the $24 million to $40 million estimate, which has now been, I think, generally agreed to on a per pupil basis, that's between $275 and $450 a year per pupil annually. As soon as I circulated this bill to superintendents around the state, I got immediate feedback, and I mean immediate. Understand universal meals, can support universal meals. We just barely got our budget passed. It was a close vote, and if we had added the 200,000, the 475,000, or the $800,000 amount that this bill would require, we fear that our budget would not have passed. So, you know, really, by funding this through local school districts rather than at the state level, you're basically adding a step for something which is an eventuality anyway, which is providing universal meals. I honestly, at this point in the process, don't care whether the money came off the top of the ed fund or through the general fund. I think that's a conversation for the money committees. What we care about as representatives of local school districts that are already having a hard time getting their budgets passed, that we not add the burden of a program that the state says districts have no option on and put it through local school districts. Right now, and you've heard this, there's 70 some odd districts that through some form or fashion, and some of them are doing it entirely with federal program money, that are offering universal school meals. That's a choice. And any school district in the state can do that. But the minute that the state says we're going to do it for every kid in every district, then at that point, the state should take responsibility for funding it and bypass the step that says, basically as an exercise, you need to put it into your local school district budget and have it voted on. Because when the school budget is defeated, and some are every year, that money for universal school meals it's off limits. It can't be touched. It's a requirement. And as a state requirement with no option for the local school district, the state should be paying for it in some form other than through the local school district budgets.
committee. Question for Mr. Francis. Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Francis, did you testify in agriculture?
No, was not invited to. The testimony there to the best of my knowledge, was pretty much Agency of Education, Joint Fiscal Office, the food advocacy organizations. But I noticed this and frankly couldn't wait to see it come to education so I could provide the testimony to you that I'm providing today.
Okay, so the school boards or nobody else from that area testified?
No,
Mr. Demaray, I think, wants to weigh in on this piece.
Well, I don't want to weigh in on this piece. I wanted to say I got an email from Senate Appropriations that they're ready for Senator Hooker and me there. So
Okay, so you please feel free to go ahead, and I will stand in as our attorney for now.
okay.
Please continue, Senator Perschlick.
Okay, that's interesting. That's helpful information. And then, so what I hear you saying is that you don't want to have it as part of the budgeting process, but you're not opposed to it being part of the ed fund as an educational expense. You just don't want to have that, basically an unfunded mandate is the way you guys would see it.
yeah, I mean, first of all, it's hard to argue against school meals, no matter who they're provided to, right? And the reason that I led my testimony by talking about the effort that's gone into providing school meals during the pandemic is because Vermont was celebrated as a state in terms of the effort that it put into nutrition. Similarly, and I'll give you more information about me than you probably want. I grew up on a farm. My dad was the county agricultural agent. So I understand the value of local farming and food markets. That's not the issue. The issue is the stress that school districts are already under, and the fact that if you ask them to include this in their budgets, they don't have an option to include it in their budgets. And that's the point I'm making. It's a statewide policy priority. It ought to be treated that way.
So if it was like categorical grants to each school district to do the meals or a per meal categorical grant, you guys would be okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, if you could find a way to subtract it from education funding, because right now school districts might have a budget of say $10 million and they get $3 million in revenue. That leaves them with education funding and they divide that by their equalized pupils, and that's where the tax rate comes from. If a school district's cost to provide universal meals, if the differential cost was $300,000 and the state said, we're going to give you a grant for $300,000 or not counted in your education spending at all, that would also work. But what we want to avoid is a situation where, as I've said, a school district puts it in its budget, the school district, budget gets defeated or increased for that matter. And there's no recognition that that's a cost that they don't have any option to contend with. And at that stage, it does meet the definition of an unfunded mandate.
And in the bill, we had part about not being counted for the excess spending.
That's a gesture. That's not a solution. Okay. There's about 12 different other things every year. When costs get tight, and I say this with all due respect to the General Assembly, we start to see more and more things excluded. But I think there's only about 11 districts or so that are at that excess spending limit right now. There's 115 school districts, and the three superintendents who I heard from, nearly immediately, none of them are in the excess spending category. They were all like, we just came off a tight budget cycle. And they understood immediately the conundrum, because nobody, including me, wants to be arguing against nutrition and meals for kids. That's not a position anybody wants to be in. But we've got an important job of advocating for school districts in terms of their budget process, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today.
Okay, but it would have the same effect if we took your advice to put it out of educational spending. That would also help those those districts that are in the excess spending. Yeah,
it would. It sure would. And nobody should kid themselves about the cost of this. But I actually think, as a matter of policy, it's a better discussion for 30 senators and 150 House members than it is 115 communities around the state. when you don't know who's going to show up for the electorate. This is a bill that says we're going to establish a priority for the state to feed every kid. And there's a cost that comes with it. We, the General Assembly, want to pay for those kids to have those meals. And as a result of that, we should agree to pay for it as a body of 30 and 150 rather than push it back out into all the school districts.
Thank you.
Are there questions? Senator Chinton, question? Yeah.
So, Jeffrey, Mr. Francis, I have a question, and I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it, but it's something I'm pondering with this. First of all, I want to say from the outset, I fully support feeding the kids, and universal school meals makes lots of sense. I'm struggling with the financing. And one thing I would like to ask you is, I know public schools need to be free of charge, but when I choose, or when I have a dog or a pet, I have to pay to register it. When I go get a driver's license, I pay a registration fee. My wondering here is, I feel like we're missing an opportunity to collect from Vermonters that send their kids to public school that can afford to contribute to this very important program. Do you see a way that by acknowledging that not every family will be able to pay for this, you see a way baked into existing processes or systems where kids that when I enroll my 3 kids to school, I have to pick a number, $10 a month, $20 a month, $100 a month. When I do the math, or $100 for the whole year, when I do the math out, that can raise $4 to $10 to $20 million if only you got it from half of the kids. Do you see a way to have those families that can afford to pay for some of the costs of providing these foods in a sensible manner, considerate of all of the families that need to be income sensitized or so on, so as to help fund this from those pockets that are able to contribute to it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'm not trying to be evasive, but it's exactly the kind of question that ought to be pointed back toward the AOE and the food advocates. Vermont is not and has never been a so-called pay-to-play state. So the point that you're making around meals could be extended to anything else, athletics, enrichment programs. And in a way, that sort of defies the notion of public education. In this particular instance, the proponents see a way to sort of improve the economy of the ag industry, to destigmatize differentiation in who gets the meals and so on and so forth. And I think that it's really a prerogative of legislators to talk about. So that's a rich conversation that you could have. I think you'll appreciate this based on the sort of tenor of my testimony. And I would say you're welcome to have that conversation, but I would not want my point that I'm making here today get lost or wrapped up in that deeper conversation. My point's really deliberate here today, and I hope I'm making it successfully.
And you do have, Mr. Francis, I haven't checked the committee website. You've already submitted this testimony?
Yes, it's in writing on the website.
That's helpful. Welcome, Ms. Siglowski and Mr. Pembroke. Any new information, good to see you both. Any new information either of you want to share, or any particular points you want to highlight?
Good afternoon. I don't have any new information to share. I would just reiterate the point about it being a state initiative that should be funded at the state level through a state allocation of funds. And I'll now make room for Mr. Pembroke.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Campion. Apologize for being a last minute attendee. I didn't realize I was doing this till about 2 hours ago, and I was asked by my professional organization, and I didn't get a chance to put anything in writing. I also apologize that I have limited bandwidth, so it's hard for me to give you both voice and audio. So I didn't want to be speaking in Klingon out here for you, so I turned my camera off. I have a brief statement and then an example from the association that emphasizes a couple of points that have already been said. The complexity of seeking federal reimbursement is already high. Not surprisingly, making free meals available due to COVID has reduced the incentive for families to submit free and reduced lunch applications. This trend would likely continue if meals were made universal free on a permanent basis. Universally, free meals likely have the effect of reducing the number of families submitting the paperwork necessary to allow schools to secure federal reimbursement for meals. Over time, this will result in the cost of these meals shifting from the federal government to the local school budgets and education taxpayers. As an example, in Brattleboro, implemented, my apologies, Provision 2 for the Brattleboro High School. Despite majority of the feeder schools averaging 60% of students being eligible for free and reduced, they were unable to inspire the high school families to participate in the income survey process to qualify for free and reduced lunch eligibility. As a result, only 35% of the students qualify for free and reduced, which led to an increase in the local budget of $250,000 versus the 75, which was projected for the program. The key takeaway budget impact will be on high end of the Joint Fiscal Office estimate, and the metrics with the USDA subsidies are determined must be replaced with a more representative measure of poverty. So, you know, like Jeff has said, and even speaking to Senator Chittenden's question, more than just the free and reduced lunch meals, all of that data, and I didn't get a chance to see what Jesse Roy had proposed for an amendment, but all that data also triggers most of the federal funds we get through titles, grants, and stuff. And the school business officials are just very concerned that this will be a long, slow decline of federal dollars as people are less incentivized to file the paperwork necessary for us to truly know who needs support and who doesn't. And, you know, to speak to Senator Chittenden's question, without that data, I don't know who, you know, we can look at clothes on people's backs and the cars they're driving and take a guess at what they might be able to afford. But without those applications where we can document who qualifies and who doesn't qualify, we're just very fearful. We're not opposed to the program. Like Jeff said, everybody wants to, you know, feed kids nutritiously. We're just concerned about the unintended consequences of losing significant federal dollars over time if we don't have a way to supplement that data collection source. Thank you.
Senator Lyons.
Yes, it's the same question that I asked the other day, and that I think that Senator Chittenden has expressed it as well. And that is, when I talk with my more affluent supervisory districts, it's very clear that some of them would be just as happy paying, kids continue to pay for meals, that they wouldn't need to have the support that's suggested in S100. Just that's a comment. I wonder, and you know, obviously we are crossover. Is there a way to look at this again to say, to balance the expenditure at each school district based on the median income for the region? We know that there are different median incomes across the state. And actually Chittenden County has a lower median income relative to cost of living. So that would be interesting. But I do, there must be some way, if we can't do that categorically, is there a way to think about transition, some kind of transitional process so that it's a perception issue. It may not be as expensive as and costly as we're hearing from AOE. It may not be the $50 million. It might not be the $20 million. We don't know what it is. So maybe there's a way to look at what those costs are over time and then try to, I'm not sure how, but we could probably think through how to transition this to a fully providing meals for kids. Now, my other question is, because I don't remember hearing anything about this, but, and maybe some of you here with us today can answer my question, and that is, what are the nutritional standards and guidelines that the schools will be held to? It will probably still be the USDA guidelines. That's what I'm thinking. And then any nutrition guidelines that the state has. That's a question. And then, so the variability of food costs is something we can't regulate in this, in the bill. So I think there's a lot in the bill for further discussion. I also think because we don't know how much money it is, that's what is so problematic. And so maybe we let this happen and collect the data that we need to understand, is this something we can continue? I think it's just a difficult place to be. I am so supportive of the program, and so it's the catch-22 yet again.
Yeah, Senator Chittenden and Senator Perchlik.
I don't want to slow this down, so I want this to keep moving. Chair Campion has to tell me if this is not worthwhile discussion, but I looked at my books. I spent for one of my children $400 to My School Bucks last year. Another one $800 because they just eat at the school more often. My point of this is I'm wondering if we threw out the option to pay for meals and had universal food, so that every day kids can just eat lunch without having to qualify or say who they are or whatnot. We just have food at our schools. Could we also simultaneously, similar to what Jeffrey Francis said, if when you register your child, you pay $1 a day, which is $5 a week, which is $20 a month, that would work out to $180 for a school year. And if anybody can't or does not fill out that paperwork, they automatically have to fill out the other paperwork, but the kids are still eating. The kids, we're just going to provide the food. But when you register your kid, you could agree to pay $5, like you'd pay for a sports program or something else, $1 a day, which works out to $20 a month and so on. That in my back of the envelope would generate $8 million a year to pay for this and help with these things. And I think then again, everybody's got food, but you're still generating some money from those that just say, okay, if I owe that money for my kid to eat, I'll just send the check. But I don't know if this is a worthwhile discussion, Senator Campion. Maybe Senate Finance should be diving into this.
No, this is helpful. Again, we will work on this next week, because I think there are going to be things that we're going to have to work on. And I'm not sure how I feel about that proposal right there. I need to think about it. Colleagues may have questions about it. It might be more work for business offices. I don't know, what folks would think about that. But I get where you're getting at. My only thing that sort of I struggle with, I see in some states, as I think somebody referred to earlier, that sort of pay to play thing, certain kids get, are contributing, certain kids aren't. I don't know. It's sort of a cultural thing that maybe we need to think about. Senator Perchlik, do you want to respond or add something?
Well, I can say something about that, but I just wanted to let Mr. Pembroke know that we heard that there are 78 schools that are already doing this, and they have found a way to collect that information so you don't lose the federal money by not having the school lunch applications. So that was a big concern of mine at first, but it seems like there's 78 schools that have done it. Definitely school districts in other states have also done it who have to deal with the same federal regulations. So it seems like there's a way to fix that. But I hear the comments on how we fund it. On the asking parents to pay, I see the point, especially if it's, you know, a sizable amount of money. It's a similar discussion we have in Transportation Committee, although I don't think we've had it yet since Chittenden's been there, about fare free. Do you make all buses free, or do you make some people pay? And what's the cost of making some people pay that can afford it to make it free? And the one thing that stuck with me on this, when I visited a local school here where the food program manager wanted to go to universal free meals, but was kind of worried about getting it passed in the school budget, said, like, we don't ask students to pay for the school nurse. So it's not like some people pay for the school nurse and some people don't. Some people could afford to make a payment for when they have an appointment with the school nurse, but we provide that nursing service to all students. And I hadn't thought about it that way, and I thought that was a helpful way to think about it.
Chair Campion, could I comment on that?
As soon as Senator Terenzini has an opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Campion. I sort of like Senator Chitten's idea. I'd like to unpack that a little more if we had time, but I just, for procedural question, because this is would be considered a money bill, obviously, in my mind, do we get another few days with this for next week, or does it have to be voted on today?
Excellent question. It has to be voted on today, but as other committees are doing, I know my morning committee just did it. They are moving things along, knowing that they have a few extra days to work on a committee report, basically, on the bill. So what I anticipate us doing is sometime next week, and I can talk to Senator Kitchell to hold on to this for as long as we need to. Excuse me, I'm swallowing a carrot. To continue taking testimony, come up with a committee report, possibly an amendment or two, depending on what we learn, and go from there. We could, for new senators, and I'm looking to Senators Lyons, Hooker, and Perschlick to weigh in on this also. We can move this without recommendation. That does happen. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that is something that I suspect Senator Lyons, in particular, being the senior member here, really has probably been involved with in the past. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Senator Lyons, that might be helpful at this point with regard to that kind of messaging and things like that.
Well, I think, I don't think that would be a very good message. I think we're hearing everyone on the committee say that feeding kids at school is critically important. Well, I think everybody feels that way. But questions have been raised about the effect on people's pocketbooks. So so in some ways it just travels down the hallway as an appropriations issue. On the other hand, I was just reminded that there is a 5-year timeline in the bill, and I think maybe we could look at that. There might be a way, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, to look at that and then understand the implications of supporting the bill as a law. So I would not recommend the bill. I would send it with a favorable report. So
yeah,
that's my own opinion.
No, again, that's where I am also, knowing, again, Senator Terenzini and others, that next week we will work on this starting on Tuesday and consider these amendments and other things. Senator Chittenden.
We can support this. We can say we love this, but still, as more information comes with finance, if we're just not happy, you can still vote no on the floor. So that's something that could also happen, I'm assuming.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Can advance something, recognizing that we believe in the issue and want to advance it. It's going to be at least in appropriations. They will also, and I would highly recommend, and this is not a criticism, but at this year in particular, I would always recommend to witnesses, don't wait to always be invited. Please ask to be invited. And I would recommend that happened in appropriations and as things move forward and in the House. And I only say that, and again, it's not a criticism. It's just, this is a unique year, continues to be a unique year with Zoom and not the usual human interactions that I think sometimes we all rely on to get our work done.
If I can make a follow-up
Please,
comment.
Senator Chittenden, go ahead.
And then I promise, Jeff, this is my last one, Mr. Francis. Just to Senator Perchlik's point, I agree. We need to provide a certain degree of safety services. To your nurse's point, I would just say Jeffrey Francis's comment on sports, as well as things like musical instruments. In the way this food, the children don't have to eat this food. They can still bring their own food. But I'm just looking for creative ways to pay for what I want every child to have access to without qualification of good, nutritious food while they're at school every day. And on the transportation thing, just to bring that back there, I'm a big fan, which still ties to this point, rational assessment. And that's where I want to rationally assess for the usage of this. And that's where I think parents, which are benefiting from having kids consume this food, should be assessed something, if they can pay, in a methodical way that still provides for universal food. So that's all.
I think it's a good point. It's interesting for me, one thing I'm just thinking about, and not looking for anybody to comment, but it would be interesting to see what our neighbors to the north and other countries sometimes do around this kind of access to universal meals. Mr. Francis, please.
I'll be very brief. First of all, thanks for the level of conversation that you're having. It's what we come to expect in the education committees. And frankly, that's why I was eager to see the education committee get this, because as Senate Ed Committee members, you delve deeply into the issues and the interconnectedness between what's happening in schools. And I'm glad for the robust conversation. The second thing I would note is that, whether it's a parent or not, this conversation connects to things like the weighting study. So if the weighting study had been implemented this year, the dynamics of this conversation would be the same, but the communities that would be thinking of in terms of budget challenges would be different. And that's where the importance of a statewide funding source, at least for me, comes through. And then finally, to go to Senator Perchlik's point, he in a way made my point, because when school districts are confronted with budget challenges, they unfortunately are forced to look at things like how many hours they have a nurse in the building, what are the enrichment programs, how many teachers do they have, and when the state makes a policy decision, you shall pay for meals for every kid, irrespective of how laudable and purposeful that policy initiative is. In this particular case, it gives the district no choice but to fulfill that program. And that's exactly what my point is in terms of it being a state funding source rather than relying on local budgets. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Senator Perchlik.
I just want to point out, I wasn't trying to make a point by saying that. I just thought it was an interesting way to look at it if people are questioning, how we might fund different things. But that aside, I agree with Mr. Francis on that. But I have a question for Mr. Francis about Senator Chittenden's point on, would you see schools could schools, I guess is a question, collect funds even though there was this universal funding? Do you see any way to do a hybrid approach like that? Like, could schools decide to do that as a way to, or, what's your view of how that would work? That's my only question, is how you would do both.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's three aspects to my response. One is, in my 2 decades of work in this education policy arena, every time that's come up, it's been discouraged, because in a way it runs counter to the notion of public education. If you start to differentiate based on families' ability to pay. I do know and have heard that in some states, districts accept voluntary contributions. So families make determinations about, and we see families contribute to funding. They support schools in a whole variety of ways. And then my third point is, even to the extent that you evolved in that direction, if you could call it evolving, I'm not sure you would, but it's still not reliable from year to year to year, right? So I think it goes to my point, which is if as a matter of state policy, you'll embrace the program like the one that's described in S100, and you want that to happen in the best manner without interruption, you take out as many variables as you can. One variable would be a district not passing a budget. Another variable would be a change in a different community's economic setting. And the best way to deal with it is to say, this is a priority of the state. The state's going to pay for it, and just do it in that straightforward a manner.
I want to echo Mr. Francis's comments. Thanks. I mean, this is a robust conversation, a good conversation, and one that I think we're going to continue. I appreciate everybody and their written testimony. I know we still need to hear from Mr. Fannin, so we're not wrapping this up, but I think it's going to warrant some planning and getting folks together and continuing the conversation on Tuesday. And thank you all for making yourselves available. I really appreciate it. And you may be hearing from us well before Tuesday. Mr. Fannin, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. Thank you very much. Jeff Fannin from Vermont and EA. My comments will be rather brief, and the conversation was enjoyable to listen to just a few minutes ago. But Vermont and EA has been involved in this effort with Hunger Free Vermont and the coalition for some 2 years now to ensure that kids are fed, because we firmly believe that it's the right bill to pass. It's the right thing to do. And I think we all agree here. I mean, I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that. I'm not suggesting that in the least. But certainly Vermont and EA members, their suggestion here is it's rather simple. Kids need to be fed so they can learn. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Hungry kids don't learn, and they're not as attentive. They've got other issues going on, and feeding them is just a critical component to their academic success. So we're suggesting to you that it's part of the academic model that we want to foster. So we do support S100, and I happy to answer some questions about the funding issues. Some of the questions that you just addressed, and I'd like to speak to, is the stigmatization. So one of the aspects of the coalition was to remove that from, kids having to qualify for free and reduced lunch, if you will. And that is, so if we're going to ask parents to contribute, it just sort of flips it in a reverse in a way, and we still end up with a stigmatization. So I think it's important to note that one of the social emotional aspects of this bill is to ensure that all kids are fed. Certainly we all agree on that, but the stigmatization from being a low income kid is removed. Oh, you're paying, but so-and-so is not. And that issue is taken off the table by feeding all kids with the Universal Meals Program. I think that's really important for the kids' well-being, socially, emotional. I do think the bill on page 4, my page 4, I don't know what your pagination is, but the bill does address in section 1 the concern about getting necessary information from, to draw down from federal resources. Certainly we need to do that, and we agree with that. But I think there are other ways to identify students who are, and families, frankly, who are accessing programs for low-income Vermonters. So I think there are other ways to do it. And as Senator Perchlik pointed out, 78 or so schools are already doing it. So I think maybe we can ask them how they're doing it, right? Let's not make this too complicated and figure that out. So there is a way to do it. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and happy to answer any questions, but we do support S100 and hope it can move forward to feed all kids in Vermont schools.
Yeah, thank you for that. Senator Chittenden.
I just want to make clear, Mr. Fan, I completely agree. And the stigmatization, I can't pronounce it.
I know.
We got to get rid of that. And the notion I'm putting on the table is still to just make universally food available to all the kids, but finding another way that when kids register to collect something from families and not something from others without any kids ever knowing about it. And again, I fully support this bill. I want it to move forward. I'm just trying to think of ways to pay for it.
Thank you.
Senator Perschlick.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fannin. So what do you think of this idea that Mr. Francis put forward about a different funding mechanism, or do you not have an opinion on that?
No, I think that we should fund it. It is a state priority. And if that you see fit to fund that off the top of the ed fund, for example, or excluding it from ed spending, there are ways to do it. And I think we can figure that out. And I would, Mr. Pembroke, Jeff Francis, Sue Siglowski, I mean, those are the folks who are in the nuts and bolts of how to fund it. And I would turn to them. But I think if they're suggesting that it come off the top of the ed fund and it's a priority for the state, and I think it should be, and I hope that it is, then I think that's the way to do it. So, schools will have challenges. They always do. Some communities find it more difficult to pass a school budget than others. And that's will always be the case. So to the extent this is a priority, we ought not to exacerbate that challenge for those communities. I'll say it that way.
Thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Fannin? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much. Committee, why don't we take a pause? Since again, we will be continuing this, but we'll take a little break. People can think about this. I don't want to rush into a vote. We'll come back in about 10 minutes, and then what we'll do is we'll vote on this. We'll take up the S16 amendment, vote on that, and then conclude, if Mr. Desmarais doesn't mind, bringing us through the some language, possible language for appropriations as it relates to after-school dollar distribution, so that we can have an opportunity to do that. So, and as of yesterday, I thought we were going to be here until 6 or so. It doesn't look like it will even be close unless somebody has things that they want to, secret amendments, things like that they want to pull out at this point. So I'll